Water, this land was made for you and me.
Hello, everybody. This is Daphna, and welcome to the another edition of the People Speak radio show. Here, we believe when the people speak, they make a difference. Today, I will be speaking with Shannon Lee, daughter of Linda Cadwell Lee and the famous Bruce Lee, martial artist and actress. Shannon, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much.
Fascinating history that you have here. Bruce Lee, your father, you were very young when he died, weren't you, Shannon?
I was 4 years old when he passed away.
Do you have any memories of him?
My memories are very brief. They're not fluid memories like you have later in life as an adult where you recall all the things that were said and situations from beginning to end. My memories are more like brief snapshots. Like I remember going to the set, visiting him on the set. I remember,
you were in one of his movies,
yard.
Weren't you?
Excuse me?
Weren't you in one of his movies as a child?
No, I was not.
Oh, okay. I thought you were. I seem to recall reading that somewhere at one time.
You may have.
I may have. I'm sure that there's probably a lot of things that people read that aren't necessarily true. And your mother raised you after the death of your father?
Yes, myself and my brother. My mother raised us.
And you moved to California?
We did. We located in Southern California in the Los Angeles area when I was 5, and I lived there until I went away to college at 18.
You did live in Japan for a couple of years.
I lived in Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong.
From the ages of 2 to 4, when my father was alive. When he died when I was 4, then we left Hong Kong. But it took us a little while to find a place to sort of land and put down roots. We lived in Seattle for a time, which is where my mother was from, but eventually we went back to Los Angeles.
And your mother kind of kept tabs, and there was a movie after your father's passing that she had quite a lot of issue with, wasn't there?
Which movie are you referring to?
Well, I know that it was the life of your father, but I guess it was something that she had opposed at the time.
Well, there were a number of movies that came out. I don't know the specific movie you're referring to, but there were a number of movies and articles and all sorts of things that were written shortly after he passed away that were very exploitive and conspiracy theory-esque, if that is a word, and that she was not happy about. But that sort of thing settled down to a degree after a period of time, and the other movies beyond that point were, they released Game of Death, which was a film that my father made, but did not finish during his lifetime, and the company Golden Harvest that was producing it took the existing footage and married it to some new footage and released that film. And then, and that was when I was a kid of about, I guess I was probably about 8 or somewhere in there, 8 or 9, somewhere in there. And then, of course, in 1993, Dragon, the Bruce Lee story was released, but that was done in connection with my mother.
She helped facilitate that happening, the continuation, actually, because he did die during that movie.
No, Dragon, the Bruce Lee story was a biopic that was shot by Universal, and it was, they optioned the rights to the book that my mother had written called Bruce Lee, The Man Only I Knew, and they did a biopic of his life story, which was released in 93, and they consulted with her on that project.
When you read the book that your mother wrote about your father, did that kind of solidify the kind of person that you didn't really have an opportunity to know?
I would say that certainly when I read that book, I was quite a bit older. I was an adult when I read that book. And obviously it was a lot of the types of things my mother had told me about as a child growing up when she would talk to me about him. And so in that way it didn't necessarily tell me anything that I didn't already know, although it did go into great detail about the inquest following his death and that sort of thing, which is informative and something that you don't necessarily get into a lot of detail about as a kid. So there were some things that were definitely informative in that book, but for the most part, it was really just an extension of all the things that I'd heard about him from her growing up. And I think that I would have to say that the things that I hear from people that knew him, the stories that they tell are always really wonderful to hear from my perspective, but that they seem to ring true for me based on sort of a more inherent, essential level in terms of how I perceive him in an energetic and essential way.
Mm. Your brother Brandon died in almost an eerily similar situation. Not that your father was shot, but they were filming a movie at the time that was never completed during their lifetime. When he was killed, it was a lot of people seem to believe that it was some kind of a curse that the family had on them. How do you feel about that?
I certainly don't believe in any kind of curse. If I did, I would probably lead a very sheltered life and be afraid to leave my home. But I don't live my life that way. I think it was, I don't really see it as a curse or a coincidence or any of that thing. I think that the thing that is the most portraying of that is that it makes it extremely all the more tragic, if you ask me. That somebody who had a father who was in the prime of his life and died from an accident, then had a son who was in the prime of his life and also died as a result of an altogether different type of accident, but
an accident nonetheless.
But an accident nonetheless, and I think that those two things just make for a much more tragic situation as opposed to a cursed situation.
Now, you were very young when your father died, but with Brandon, you were older, and how tragic for a young sibling to have to lose her brother that way.
Yes. It was definitely far and away the most tragic event of my life, in some ways more so than my father because I was older and much more aware of what was going on, obviously. It was really horrible in many ways. It was tragic because of the loss of my father. It was tragic because of the loss of somebody whom I loved and adored and was such a vibrant light and such a fun and wonderful person. He was set to be married in 2 weeks, and I was going to be his best man at the wedding, best woman at the wedding, and, he had his whole life ahead of him. He was 28 years old. And so obviously it was very terrible for me and for my family, and it was, to date, probably the worst thing I've endured in my life.
Probably very crushing. I can't imagine what your mother must have gone through